I have been blessed in this church with many shield bearers, with many people who, if I stumble or fall, they will pick up the cross where I lay it down at and charge into battle for me. Amen? Someone will charge whether I tell them to or not. That's okay too, right? They're already in battle. I'm like, hey, you should go, and they're just already gone. You know I love you, Colleen, too, right? No, I'm just kidding. Colleen, she's become one of my generals around here, especially with the food pantry and running everything. You have been very, very good to the ministry. You'd like it better if I made you stand up, come up here, and let them clap. I'm just kidding. If you know Colleen, she loves public embarrassment. It's her favorite thing. So turn with me, if you would, to Joshua chapter 1. We've been talking about hearing the voice of God. I don't know if you know this, but humans start off as some of the least developed of all infants in the animal kingdom, right? I mean, if you can imagine a horse coming out like a baby does, it would just kind of lay there for a long, long time. And obviously, most animals come out into nature ready to take off and defend themselves and run from predators and all those sorts of things. And our babies just kind of lay there, right? Like anything could eat them if it needed to, right? They don't really do anything. As a dad, it's kind of the most disappointing part about fatherhood is how lifeless they actually are when they come out. Not that it's anything, I know, and women say they're always cute. Babies need to grow into their skin before they're cute. I'm sorry, they just do. Okay? When they come out and they're still all smushed, right? Their faces are all wrinkly. They're kind of ugly. And I know you don't say that because it's usually your baby, right? And of course, yours was pretty. Yeah, yours was great. But I've seen some ugly ones in there sitting next to mine, right? They don't react a lot to their surroundings when they first come out. They're like asleep all the time. Their eyes are closed, right? There's a time at which you start to realize your baby responds to outside stimuli. Now that you like. Right? When all of a sudden they hear your voice and they look, like mom, you're holding the mom and they're looking for you, right? Or dad, it comes later when they look for dad. They don't look for dad for a while. Do you know that? Like they're looking for mom all the time because mom is usually food and comfort and dad's just kind of there when mom's tired, right? That's dad's whole job. It takes them a little longer to reach for us, Josh, than it did for mom, right? And we're okay with that. In fact, one of the great trials of my fatherhood was that Tristan and Gareth were only 2 years apart, and Gareth, every time I would come home, would come right to the door and arms out, Dad, pick me up. And then all of a sudden, Tristan was there, and his arms were out too, and I was like, I can't pick both. I got you, and you can't. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to pick one, right? But you guys know which one I loved more, right? No, you do now. I'm kidding. There's a spiritual development cycle that's very much the same, that when people come into Christ, that most of the times their needs, their wants, their desires are focused on who they are and what's going on with them, right? There becomes a time in the life of a Christian after they've been born again where they begin to understand their surroundings. They begin to look around and see God not just working in their lives, but also working in the lives of others. There becomes a time in your walk with Christ where, just like with Hunter one day, I remember I was there for him. The other two, I don't remember. You didn't walk till you were like 12. Because he was huge. He was big. He was a big kid. He had a lot of weight. Gravity was not on his side for a long time. But Hunter stood up how old was he? 11 months? 9 months? 9 months. I'm standing there with him in the kitchen, and he's standing up with me, and I let go. And you're expecting the diaper hit, right? But he didn't. He stood there. And you had that first moment of, oh my gosh, this thing stands on its own. It's becoming somewhat functional, right? Listen, I've always judged all our pets by how I think they could survive in the wild. We used to have this fat Manchester Terrier, and this thing was all belly and legs, and his legs almost didn't get there, because he was just a big old guy, and I never really respected that dog until the one time we lived in Virginia Beach, and he got away from me, and when I came around the corner, he already had a goose down by its neck, and I grabbed the leash and pulled him off, and I was like, good dog, bad dog, but I'm glad you could eat if I weren't here. I'd like to know that about my pet. And about your kids, you want your kids to be able to survive on their own. You know, there's something about God watching us grow as babies into things that can actually stand on our own to the point where we can actually hear and understand His voice in a way that's more than just an infant does. Right? An infant finds comfort from the voice of a parent, but it cannot understand the will of the parent. It can't understand the wishes of the parent, what the parent wants from the child, or the expectations. All it knows is the actual sound of the voice, but there's a part in that development where the child begins to understand what the parent means when they're saying things. And then you say things like bedtime, night-night, take a bath, right? And what do kids instinctively learn to do at that point? Run! They take off. Did you know there are people who've been sitting in church for 20 years and the only thing they know to do when God's voice speaks is to run? Right? This turned out very badly for us, right? Because Hunter was just famous for, as soon as he heard the word night-night, I know they moved that up and I went to step on that. You guys almost already saw it happen, right? As soon as we said night-night, he would take off running, right? Hunter, it's time to go night-night. I'm not going night-night. This apartment's big. I'll hide, right? Like, just didn't want to go to sleep. And then one night she said that, and he took off running, and he caught the rocking chair right in the head, right? And so I'm sitting at the emergency room with him, and the doctor's telling me to hold his head still so they could put in the stitches, and all this, just absolute trauma, because when we said night-night, he took off running. And how many times in church do we have people that when God starts to put any sort of requirement into the voice, where the voice isn't just there to soothe you, it's not just there to comfort you, but the voice is there to call you to battle, or it's to call you to fight, or it's to call you out of what you're doing into something else. We don't know what to do other than to run from that voice, other than to turn it off, other than to turn up the TV, get on our phone, do something to make it go away. Right? Well, Joshua, in chapter 1, verse 2, it says, after the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, said, Moses, my servant is dead. Now you and all the people prepare to cross over the Jordan to the land I am giving the Israelites. Now, if this were a movie, Joshua would start with that, I bet you're wondering how I got into this situation. Right? Like, I bet you're wondering how I ended up at the front of the line leading all of these people, because Joshua was not, anybody famous's son. He didn't have any royalty in his blood. He wasn't a particularly special person. And yet here in Joshua 1:1, Moses dies and Joshua tag, you're it. And so to understand Joshua, we have to understand what his life looked like. Now, I've got like 37 verses on Joshua, so we're not going to turn to all of them and tell you where they're at. If you want to write them down, it's good reading just to follow his life, because his life is amazing. Now, the first thing to know about Joshua is in the Battle of the Amalekites. Do you remember this battle? In the Battle of the Amalekites, Israel's fighting the Amalekites. They had come against the rear of Israel. As Israel is getting out of Egypt, the Amalekites attacked the old and the weak, the women and the children who were in the back of the line. That's why God's anger burns against the Amalekites, and he says, I'm going to wipe them completely from the face of the earth. They didn't come to defeat Israel militarily. They came to exterminate the people of God. They didn't succeed the first day, and the next day there was a battle where the men got back to the back of the line. Understand, when you have millions of people traveling together, the line gets so long, right? And they're so spread out. So by the second day, Israel has gathered their armies now to fight the Amalekites, who's already killed so many Israelites, and they're having this battle, but the battle is going badly for them. So up on a hill, Moses raises his hands, and the battle begins to win. Guess who's fighting that battle? Joshua. He's in charge at this point. He's down there fighting the battle, fighting for the very existence of the Israelites, and all of a sudden he's doing well. And I wonder if he thought he was doing well and didn't understand that all of his success came from the upraised hands of somebody else. That everything that he was seeing success for was because somebody was up on a hill somewhere raising their hands and praying for him. And then when that guy's hands started getting tired, two more people came on either side of Moses, and they kept his hands up until the end of the day. The battle went well, and they survived, and they won, right? And Joshua thought, man, I bet I did good. I did great, right? And it wasn't him. It's because there was somebody out there. I tell you what, I covet the prayers of intercessors more than anything. I know there are those of you that pray for me during the week. This is the first time I ever put myself on the prayer chain, wasn't it? I was having those moments this week. I was having those, why do you hate me, God moments, right? Like, what have I done, Lord? I'm so sorry. I'm repenting of everything. I'm just laying there in misery. I'm not good at being sick. I'm terrible at it. Kristen avoids me, for good reason. She's like, here's your quarantine, stay. No. I'll bring you everything you need. You stay in here, right? I'm terrible. I think it's why God keeps me from being sick all the time, Josh. He knows how much I can handle, and I can't handle a whole lot of it, right? I probably should have had Jake preach today, and yet here I am up here. I'm like, no, I'm out of bed. I'm good. Let's go, right? I woke up this morning. I think I scared Stuart a little. I was a little angry this morning. I woke up. I'm mad about being sick. I want to be back up, be back in the battle, back in the pulpit, changing lives, preaching the word of God. I got things to do, right? I had time for being sick. But it's because I have people praying for me that I still stand, right? Oh, I know. Man, this week I know. So it's recorded later, but I think it was at this point, and other people agree with me on this, that Joshua's name gets changed. Because before this, he was actually known as Hosea, which was the person I preached on 2 weeks ago. Hosea means, oh, salvation, right? Like you're crying out for it. Oh, salvation, come, save me. Right? I need help. Save me. Right? Joshua means Yahweh saves. It was Moses who changed his name. Moses said, your name, I'm not even going to leave the lid on that. We're going to need that. Moses said, I'm going to change your name not from, oh, please save me, right? But to I am saved. You know, there are a whole lot of people that need to get from that point of crying out all the time for being in help to the point where they can actually testify about what God has brought them through. Again, when we talk about the different stages, how you get to these different places, how at some point God's got to be able to let go of you and you stand on your own, right? God's got to, there we go. Get enough out. Well, we're going to go. It's how I get better. I get better just by working. You know, other people get better by resting. I rest for a little bit, then it's time to work. Some of you need to move out, right, of the oh, save me mentality and get into the, you know what, God's got my back and I'm going to get through this and I know it seems bad, but He's going to keep moving me on, right? I don't know why it is every time something goes bad, some of us think that the world is going to end. Has it ended yet? Right? Listen, I've lost jobs before. The world didn't end. Kristen and I have had arguments before. The world didn't end. I didn't succeed at something I really wanted to succeed at. And you know what? The world didn't end. And even in the failures and even in the dark times and even in the times where you had to struggle a little bit, it was the struggling through that and coming out of that and still being with God through that let me know. And so there comes a time that when I go through a trial, I'm not sitting there thinking, oh God, you don't love me anymore and you've forsaken me and you must be mad at me, to knowing that I may need to go through this and there's something I may need to learn, but there's a God on the other side of this who's still going to pull me through. When are we going to get to that place? When can He let go of us and we still stand? Having done all to stand, stand. I'll shout. Next time we hear about him is when Moses goes up to the mountain to meet God. Remember how you hear the story? Moses goes up to the mountain and God shows him His glory, right? And Moses comes down shining. Do you know who helps him up the mountain and helps him back down the mountain? It was Joshua. Not only that, Joshua is the one that says, I hear noise in the camp. I wonder how old Joshua was at this point, because Moses had to turn to him and say, that's not battle. If you know anything about what happened, when Moses went up to the mountain, the Israelites went into paganism, right? Moses is gone, so they're like, hey, we'll make a golden calf. We'll worship like the pagans worship. And kids, close your ears, the pagans worshiped with sex. And because there was this kind of thing going on in the camp, when they're coming back, Caleb says, I think I hear sound in the camp. And Moses was like, that's not a good sound. That's not war. Caleb, just stay here a second. Let me go deal with this, right? But the thing you need to know about Caleb is every time he knew where the glory of God was going to be, Caleb was going to be there too. Every time he knew that the glory of God was going to show up somewhere, he knew Moses heard from God. He knew Moses could speak to God face to face. So you know where Joshua wanted to be? Right next to that guy. He wanted to be right next to the guy that he knew for sure was hearing from God on a daily basis. He wanted to follow around with this guy that he knows there's something going on in this life, right? And I love this because in Exodus 33, when Moses would go into the tent of meeting to hear from God, everybody else would leave except Joshua and Moses would go into the tent. Joshua was always kind of there, just at his elbow, right? And Moses would go into the tent and the Lord would speak to him and all that. And Moses would leave and Joshua would stay in the tent. It reminds me kind of Samuel, right? How Samuel would sleep next to the Holy of Holies. He wants to be as close to the presence of God as he can. And what we know about Joshua is that it's not like Samuel. It never says God spoke to Joshua in these moments. It never says God spoke to Joshua like he did to Moses. And I wonder if Joshua was just crying out for it and crying out for it. And how come you're always talking to him, God, but not to me? And I'm going to wait here. But let me tell you something. Your level of dwelling will affect your level of hearing. If you want to hear from God, you've got to learn to dwell in the presence of God. If you don't spend any time in the presence of God, you're not going to hear from God. Don't think that you can come to church 1 hour a week out of all the hours you have, and you're just in that hour a week, okay, I'm ready, God, go. And at the end of that hour, okay, time, and I'm out. Let me tell you something. You are not going to hear from God, have a move of God, or have anointing in your life if that's how you treat your relationship. No more than it would with any other person. I'd have no idea who Kristen was if once a week I came, hey, how's it going? You know everything, right? And then you're out, right? See you next week, right? I'd have no idea who she is. Sometimes in church we have no idea who's sitting in the pew next to us because all we spend with them is 5 or 6 minutes a week. You know how I measure when a person belongs to a church? When they have dinner with somebody at the church who isn't on staff, right? Because you'd be like, pastor loves me, but he's kind of paid to love me, right? Like they pay him a salary so he'll love me, you know. I don't know if it counts, right? I'm just kidding. You know, you guys don't. They don't pay me that much anyway. Because trust me, for some of you, if we were on a scale, I kid. But when you have lunch with somebody in the church, outside the church, that there's a community there, there's a bonding there that exists, and that's how I know somebody really is part of a church, right? When your whole relationship with the church isn't here 1 hour a week. That's why we do a lot of activities. We have a lot of things. We have places where people can jump in and minister because I always want the opportunity to develop the friendships that exist. Because listen, I know you guys are so holy, right? Oh, you guys are God's chosen people. Sometimes you got to talk to each other like you're just friends. Did you know that? I mean, Sharon, you're probably one of the holiest people, right? But sometimes I just got to talk to you like you're Sharon, call you the wrong name, laugh it off, go on with life, right? And we have to have that, right, Elvis? Sometimes we just have to have those quiet conversations the women can't hear, you know what I'm saying? And we just kind of got to talk and joke and have our time, right? Because there's a fellowship to that and it shows that you belong. And there's a way that with God, if you're spending time in His presence, if you know who He is, if you wake up looking for Him and you go to bed looking for Him and there's a pursuit of Him and everywhere you know His presence to be, that is where you go, then your relationship begins to change and His voice begins to become clear. And I hear a whole lot of people saying, well, I've never heard from God. You've never met Him. You've never spent the time to look for Him. You've never shut down the TV and the internet and the phone and all the distractions and said, whatever happens, God, I'm going to find you. I don't know where you are, but there's something missing in me. And if I don't find you today, I'm not going anywhere until you show up. And don't tell me that you haven't heard from God if you haven't done that yet. If there hasn't been a desperation in your voice that says, I have to know what you want from me, Lord. I have to know what it is that you made me for. I have to know what it is, why I'm here. If it's more important than all those other things, you'll find time for it, you'll make time for it, and you will hear from Him. He says those that would seek Him have to believe that He is, and He's a rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. And I believe that like I believe there are chairs and a platform to stand on. I believe that like I believe that you are here. I believe in Him more than I believe in any of you. I love you guys, but I know that He's more real than any other person I've ever met because I've spent time in His presence. I have known in the dark times that He is there. I have known in the good times that He is there. I have known at dinner He is there. Watching TV, He's there. I've played video games, and God's been right there because I know how to fellowship with Him. Amen. And it's not always lay on your face and cry, holy, holy, holy. I mean, we should. I mean, if we saw Him if we got even a glimpse, right? But you know, sometimes He just wants to walk beside you. Sometimes He just wants to ride in the car beside you. And then you really can't close your eyes and say, holy, 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 because I'm not saying I've ever had a little trouble driving through the tears, but I'm just saying in general, the Lord will fellowship with you in your car. Keep your eyes open. Amen? So then most famously, in Numbers 14, Joshua was one of the spies sent into the promised land. If you don't know the story, Israel's finally there. They stop on the River Jordan. I should have done a map for this. This would have been good. This would have been a good time to have a map. The way Israel sits, you've got the Sea of Galilee and you got the Dead Sea, and the River Jordan runs between them. So they came kind of up and around, and to get into the Promised Land, they had to go over the River Jordan. So they sent spies over the River Jordan, scout out the land, see what's in there. And on the way back, I'm sure Joshua and Caleb were kind of walking away from everybody else. You know how sometimes you have a group of, say, 12 people, and there's a couple of them that are just hitting it off, right? Like, I'm going to guess one of them's Angie, because Angie can hit it off with anybody. I don't care how grumpy you are. If I put you beside Angie, she will make you happier, and you guys will walk in agreement at some point. She's just a happy, encouraging person, right? It's hard to be mad at Angie. I can't be mad at Angie, right? You can't, because, right? So I'm guessing that one of those people is like Angie. Either Joshua or Caleb is like that. They're an encourager. They're the kind of person they're like, oh yeah, we can totally do this. Yeah, if we do this right, if we attack this way, if we move our forces here, if we do these kind of things, we're totally going to get this. We can take this land. God has given us a good land. Look at all the good things it has here. Look at all the ways that we're going to be provided for. We're not going to have to eat this manna all the time anymore. There's milk and honey and grapes as big as your head. Who's that guy on TV? Oh, he should not do his own commercials. Burger big as your head, right? Yeah, right? But somehow when they get back there and they begin to tell everybody else how doable this is and how awesome this is, all they hear about is how big the warriors there are. All they hear about is how tall the walls are built. All they hear is how much hardship it's going to be. And so they begin to complain, and they just take that water and pour it all over the fire of Caleb and Joshua, right? Can I just say, in your life, don't be that guy. Don't be that girl, right? That every now and then, your kids or people you know are going to be super encouraged, super happy, super pumped up, and something in the back of your head is going to say, that's not realistic, and I don't think that's doable, and they're probably not going to succeed at that. Encourage them anyway. Let them do what they hear from God, right? If someone says, I hear from God, if it's at least scriptural and it's not physically dangerous, then I'm going to encourage them, right? Listen, I didn't hear that from God, but I wasn't listening for that, so maybe you have, and you know what? I'm going to encourage you to follow that thing and follow it through, because I want you to learn. If it is the voice of God, you're going to find all these great things, and if it's not, you know what you're going to do? You're going to drop back and punt, and that's okay too, because sometimes you have to recalibrate, and you have to say, well, maybe I didn't quite hear that right, or I didn't quite get there, and that's okay, but don't be the person that pours the water on the excitement of somebody who's heard. Amen? Don't be that guy. It's a sermon today. Don't be that guy. And then Joshua was there when the torch was passed. In Numbers 27, Moses lays his hands on Joshua and he intercedes for him. The promise from God was that the land was good, but the people were bent. And here's the thing, when Moses, and I do always picture Moses as a grumpy guy. I think probably Joshua was an encourager, because I just always picture Moses as a little grumpy. Does anybody else picture that? He's always kind of like, there's a couple of times where he's kind of thinking, okay, God, smite them all, we'll start over. There's a couple of times, right? He's just that kind of dad that doesn't want to listen to the argument. He just wants to go ahead and spank everybody and put them to bed, right? Like, I don't care, right? That was kind of Moses. So I think Joshua was the encourager in this, because people like that tend to keep encouragers around them, right? There's a balance there, right? I can say with Angie and Josh, you're kind of the anchor and you're kind of the wild card. With Kristen and I'm always like, yes, let's. And she's like, whoa there, horsey, right? And so we always kind of look for those people that kind of balance us out a little bit, that kind of help. And Kristen is fun too, and I'm not saying that she is not, because she is a hoot. I am not the fun one. I do say that too many times, sometimes. It's okay. But I always picture Moses as kind of grumpy. But Moses is at the end. He's 120. Man, that's a long way, Gloria, 120. You may have that. I know you may have it. I'm praying for it, okay? So that's only 30 more years, right? 40 more years. Listen, all that's in God's hands. We don't have, you know what I'm saying? All that's in God's hands. But Moses is done. So he lays his hands on Joshua and says, you're it. And he prays for him. Now here's the thing that I know about Moses. I'm debating on staying here or going where I want to go, and I think I'm just going to go. Because sometimes when you're trying to prepare a message, you're trying to make it say something, and you just feel, When Moses was called to lead the Israelites, God's idea of leadership is different than our idea of leadership, right? My idea of leadership is, I'm the boss, follow me. I'm the boss, do what I say. I'm the boss, so you have to, right? God's idea of leadership is, I'm putting you over this people because I need you to stand in between me and them. And when they sin, you're going to intercede on their behalf. And when they stumble and fall, you're going to feel it. And it's going to wound you. And you're going to bring that before me in prayer, and I'm going to fix it. That's what leadership is to God, right? Leadership is to God. When He sets me here as a pastor, it's not because I need people to boss around. It's because there's people I need to bleed and hurt for. There's people whose name I come in here and cry out in prayer. There are people who I go to bed praying God that He will do something in their life, because that's what leadership is to Him. But when Moses lays his hands on Joshua, he tells them, these people are gonna mess up. When you read his whole speech to him at the end of Deuteronomy, he says they're going to mess up. They're stiff-necked. They're going to break the covenant. They're going to go wayward, and things are going to happen bad to them because of that. How many parents know that no matter how much you love your kids, no matter how much you put out there for them, no matter how much you hug them, how much you kiss them, they're going to get out there and they're going to do dumb stuff. And you got a bunch of them, Kelly, so you got so many options there, right? You can't control them, though, right? There comes a point at which it's their decisions, and they get to make it, and they get to do it. But you know what you don't get to do? You don't get to stop loving them, do you? Like ever, right? How old are your kids, Mona? They're like me, right? They're older than me. And you still can't cut them loose, can you? You're like, I'd get rid of you guys, but I just, you know what I'm saying? And there's a reason for that, because when you have authority over somebody, when they've been set under you, they have been set under you so that you will stand between them and God as a watchkeeper. You will stand between them and God as an intercessor. And when anything goes on in their life, it is your calling and your job and your duty to pray for them until they get back to where they need to be. Until they become the Joshua that they're supposed to be, because they spend a whole lot of time being Nimrod, don't they? But there's a Joshua in there if you just keep praying and just keep reaching and just keep interceding. We are in a nation today that is trying so hard to run as far from God as it can run. We are in the midst of a nation that if God doesn't judge us, He's got to go back and apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. We are in a time so vulgar. We were talking with the worship team last night. Give me 1 second. About how worship is so sacred, and about there's certain music that is worship music, and there's certain music that's not worship music, and there's a sacredness in worship music. Have you tried to listen to secular music lately? Just some non-Christian stuff. Just flip through the dial, listen for about 5 or 10 minutes, and see what the message is. See what they're saying. I mean, things that we wouldn't have said in private growing up, right? Things that would never come off of our lips, never come out of our mouths. Things that were sacred. Things that meant something. Things that were holy, that were protected, that we would say, no, this is my wife and she is beautiful and I love her and I would never treat her like that. And when you look at what our culture does with all of these things now, and it's become so vulgar. It's become so violent. It's become so antagonistic. It's become so rebellious. We are called to intercede for them. We are the only thing standing between God and America. We are the only thing standing between God and judgment. We are the only thing, listen, sometimes I get a little discouraged, right? That everything just seems to be going so bad so fast. It seems to be going downhill so fast. As quick as they can get to destruction, that's how quick they're going to go. And I think, how in the world do we do anything about that, God? How do we fix any of that? How do we save any of these people? But there's this thing that when you're in the presence of God and you stand there and you begin to intercede on behalf of a wayward nation that wants nothing to do with God, that wants to rebel as hard as it can, that wants to run as far as it can, there's still a church that can stand in the gap on behalf of that nation and change the world. That our changing of the world is on our knees in prayer as we become the ones that intercede for the revival that God wants to bring. So I woke up mad this morning, Stuart. I had to watch too much TV this week because you can't do anything. I was too sick to read. How are you too sick to read, you know? Even the TV, I'm like turning it way down. I'm like, right? You watch that stuff, man. We don't understand why our kids have such trouble with self-image, why they always feel ugly, why they always feel unwanted, why they always feel like less, right? It gets me when they talk about gun control because we don't need gun control. We need vulgarity control, right? We need pornography control. We don't need, listen, if we could fix those parts of society, the violence and all those other things would follow. The problem is we treat men and women like meat and not like sons and daughters of God. Right? When you take that vulgarity and that pornography and saturate a culture with that, you devalue each human life, and men become worse and worse to men until there's nothing left. And the only thing that's going to make a difference is a church that will intercede on behalf of this world, that will stand in the gap, that will put themselves between them and us. That was only a 6-minute detour. I could still get through at least one more page. No, half of it. Because Joshua was standing at the Jordan River at this point. I met Kristen in a place called Portsmouth, Virginia, which if there's an armpit in America, it's at least one of them. It was one of those places where after church, a guy had to walk a girl out to the car, right? Like every girl had to have an escort to her car after church. I mean, it was a bad neighborhood. And the thing that got me about that neighborhood, going into it all the time, was this one sign that said the Jordan Bridge was closed. Because I understand what the Jordan meant. As Caleb is standing on the banks of the Jordan River, he knows that everything God has promised him is just on the other side of this river, but he also knows he's stood on that bank before. It's not the first time he stood this close to the promised land with all the people behind him ready to go in and do the right thing and take what was the Lord had promised, and he failed that time. He didn't fail, his fathers failed. And I had this vision, right? How many of us are standing at a river that our fathers failed at? How many of us are standing on the banks of a river that our mothers failed at? We're standing in a place where they weren't able to overcome, and here we are standing at the same river in the same sort of trials and tribulations and the same sort of things that they were never able to get to. That I have known people with great callings and gifts of God who never made it onto the other side of the river because the giants looked too big and the walls were too tall and they didn't trust God to get them there and they didn't know how to get over the water, and so they stood there. And here Joshua stands in the same place that his fathers had failed, and they all died in the wilderness, and now he's standing there. He tells the priest, take up the ark and start walking. You know what I love about when the sea cross, like when they cross the Red Sea, the waters part and they all step in and cross. It's not how it happens at the Jordan. The water doesn't cross, the water doesn't part until the last priest puts his feet in the water. Which means the front priest had to be pretty nervous. Right? Because they're carrying the ark on the shoulders, right? And so the first guy's got to go in, and I imagine he's getting about waist deep before that last guy gets in there, you know, and I bet he's getting a little nervous at that point, right? But when the last priest's feet touch the water, all of a sudden the water is stopped upstream, and all of a sudden they're crossing on dry land, and all of a sudden they're taking stones out of the middle of the water, and they're setting up a memorial because God has brought them into that place that they were always meant to go, that they overcame all the things that their fathers and their forefathers. And let me tell you something, you are here because the generation before you left you unfinished business. They left you something that still needed to be done. They left a work for you that still needs to happen. We're not in the nation we need to be in, but we can be in that if we will be what we are supposed to be. So the last priest crossed and the water parts. And you'd think it was over for him now, but it's not, because now it's time to go to war. Whew. So turn to Joshua 5. This was the verse I meant to get to, and I had to go through Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, in the first chapter of Joshua so I could read this story in Joshua 5. But now it's time for war. It's time to take on the enemies that are in the land. Do you know, even if it's something God promised you, it doesn't mean it's going to be unoccupied. Do you know that? Just because God said you could have it doesn't mean you get it for free, right? Sometimes there's a price to be paid. I love Alex. Every time Alex does something on our stage, he adds some of his own blood to our stage. This man has donated like a pint to us. You do not know the sacrifices, you know. And I'm also thankful, and Nicole had to leave, but I'm thankful she made that first aid kit for us. Tell her thank you for that. Because just because God promised it to you doesn't mean it's not going to cost something. Amen? So in verse 13, Joshua was near Jericho. We know why he's going to Jericho. He's going to Jericho to go to war. Jericho's the big walled city standing in between him and what God's promised him to have. It says he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua approached him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" What a question. You're walking around at night. My guess is he's getting away from the camp, because if there's something he learned from Moses, is that you have to separate yourself to hear from God. Did you know that? A lot of times you have to separate yourself to hear from God. You have to shut everybody else out for a little bit. You have to understand what it feels like to be alone, to be there by yourself, so that you can be in the presence of God and hear from God. And so he's going out to separate himself. It's the night before he's got to go in and do this battle, and here's a guy standing with a sword. He's like, "Hey, so are you on my side or are you on their side?" "Neither," he replied. "I have come now as a commander of the Lord's army." You know what gets on my nerves? When people try to drag God over to their side. One, God is eternal, immovable, unchangeable. You can't make him change over to your side. You guys know the other end of that, right? We got to get on his. See, the problem is most of the time we know how to fight, but we don't know how to win. We know how to argue, but we don't know how to win. We know how to get something stirred up, but we don't know how to make it into what we're looking for. And I say this because I'm on Facebook, right? Facebook is a great place for people who like to fight and not win. I've never had that. I haven't seen that post on Facebook yet where somebody's like, "Thank you, that completely changed my point of view, and now I agree with you 100%, and everything in my life is fixed. I appreciate it." I haven't seen that yet. And I've won an online argument because I'm just a great arguer. I mean, hey, I could argue all day. Doesn't make anybody right if you win an argument. Did you know that? Do you know you can be wrong and win an argument? It's just a matter of how far you want to go and what you want to say, right? We don't know how to win. See, the problem is we see something wrong, we know we want to fix it, but all we know how to do is point at it and yell, "There it is! It's wrong! Right there! See it? It's wrong!" Right? It's not fixing anything. It's not changing anything. Did you know that only God can change what's going on right now? Did you know that we are completely powerless? Listen, I love our country, but I often snicker at the saying that said if voting changed anything, they wouldn't let us do it. Right? That's a little cynical. I get that. But I know that anything made by man will eventually fail, and that only what God builds will remain. And that there are all kinds of people that have all kinds of schemes and all kinds of plans and all kinds of this and all kinds of that. But in the end, the minds of kings are like channels of water in the hands of the Lord, and that he has all of this planned out, in control, and knows what's going on. And there is nothing that's going to come on the news tomorrow where God's going to be like, "Well, I didn't see that coming." Like, you got me there, right? I am totally surprised by that. Let's bow our heads. I got 3 questions I want to finish with. Answer them in your heart. First one is, have you learned to hear the voice of God? Are you still running when you hear it? Does it still scare you? Does it still freak you out a little bit? Do you still get away from it? Have you learned to hear the voice of God? Number 2, have you crossed the river that keeps you from God's promise? You know what God wants you to be. You know where you're supposed to be. In your heart somewhere is the idea of who you would be if you just weren't so you. If you just have so many things wrong with you, if there just wasn't this in my life, or I didn't have this sickness, or I didn't have these people in my life, or I had more money, or I had this, or I had that, all those things that you think keep you from being who you are, who God has called you to be, none of those can withstand the call and the voice and pull of God. That if you will take His hand and let Him lead you, He will pull you across that Jordan River into something you've never been before. My question is, have you crossed that river that keeps you from God's promise? Number 3, are you on the Lord's side? Some of us will fight any battle that comes along. That's just how we are. We're fighters. That's what fighters do. I don't want you to be a fighter. I want you to be a winner. The only way you're going to win is to be on God's side. All these other plans that men have, all these other things that they say are important, all the things the news wants you to be afraid of, all the things the media is going to try and scare you with, all the things your friends are going to try and pressure you into, all the other things that are going to come at you from the outside, none of those matter if you're on the Lord's side. Sometimes you just got to look at your feet and say, are they on this side of the line or that? I'm not going to call you up here today. I'm not going to call anybody out. But if the answer to one of those questions isn't what you want it to be, and if you just want one guy who will stand in the house of God and cry out your name, if you just want somebody who will pray for you this week and say, I want to get there, with every head bowed and every eye closed, just raise your hand and say, Pastor, that's me. I just want you to call out my name this week. I just want to see things change. I want to know what it's like to win and not just to fight. I want to know that there's more than just struggle. You can put your hands down. You and me know. There were several of you, and let me tell you, your face is going to be in front of me, and I'm going to be on mine. And between me and you, we can lick this thing. Between me and you, we're going to get across this river. See, that's the thing. You just need one more priest. You're called to be a priest of God. You just need one more person to help you carry this ark across the river. You need one more person that's going to get in that water with you, who's going to get their feet wet with you. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to call out your name. God's going to change your life. I believe it. More than I believe the pulpit I lean against, more than I believe in the chair I sit on. I believe in a God who changes lives. More than I believe the sun will rise and set, I believe in a Jesus who loved me so much He'd die for me. More than I believe in my own ability to sin, I believe in the grace of a loving God. Let's all stand. Can you do Jesus, lover of my soul again?